Hey, good morning. I am Pastor Mike, one of the leaders here at Awaken, and we're excited as we continue our series, Follow Me. We loaded up on a bus. This was some years ago, and we were headed on a trip, and it was supposed to take us about 5 hours. I think it took us probably more like 8 hours. Has anybody been on a trip like that? And we traveled in this bus that, as we got into the mountains, really sputtered probably 30 miles an hour trying to get up these mountain hills. And I think on the highway we topped out our top speed at 55. It was quite the trip. But there was a group of us, and we loaded up. And there was probably about 15 students. And for many of them, it was their first trip. Their first trip out of Northeast Ohio. We went down to a place called Kermit, West Virginia. Has anybody been to Kermit, West Virginia? No? We actually have a family here that is from that area, and I think they are out on spring break. But we traveled to that area. It was for many of those students, it was their first missions trip. As we got there was some tension with some parents that were like, I really don't know if I want my child to go on this trip. And we were just going down to help this church, this small church, and there was a group of churches that were going down together to help this church reach out into their community. But this community was very different than where a lot of these students had come from, I'm guessing, than where a lot of maybe you have come from. This community, most of the people in that community, their homes consisted of dirt floors. Most of them may have not had running water. Most of them probably had lost electricity. Most of them, though, which is funny about that culture, and maybe some of you are from this culture, had really nice vehicles in their driveway. But there was a value over those vehicles and less of a value in their living environment. But this church wanted a group to come in to help reach this community with the gospel. And so we went down and I think we passed out light bulbs. We went, tried to build relationship and connection with some of the people that lived in the area. And we were told as we went into this that many of the area, there was a lot of racial segregation. And so we had to be very careful how we approached certain things and some of the things that we said and did. But this was just a small church in this community that said, we want to be on mission to our community. And we want to have others come in to help us do that. But I remember we were an 8-hour trip after only supposed to be 5 hours. We were, I think, the last people to pull in. And we were supposed to get there before it got dark. We got there and it is dark. They pull all of us into this small worship space, maybe half this size here. And they begin to share with us and explain to us the community that we're in, the things that we're going to be a part of, the things that we're going to help them prepare to reach their community. And then from there, they kind of showed us where we were going to stay for the next week. And that's where it got really interesting. They put us in these mobile trailers that were on their property. And picture this part of West Virginia with all these hills and mountains and trees. And it was kind of spread out through this large, massive area with this small church building sitting on it. We walked into these trailers, and these trailers smelt like they hadn't had anybody in them except maybe the critters living in them for years. We walked in, and there were literal holes in the floor. There was the smell of mildew. There was mold growing on the walls. They were bug-infested, termite-infested, and that was our living arrangements for the next week. But I saw God do something that week within the lives of those students and the lives of the other adult leaders that came down to help lead that trip. I saw God build a culture within those group of people. I saw God build some momentum within that group of people that challenged that group of people to think outside of themselves. I saw God do a preparatory work that when we landed back home, we were different. We saw things differently. We saw God differently because of that trip. Now, some of you went on a trip yesterday. As we celebrated 4 years, we wanted to say, okay, what is a great way for a church like Awaken to celebrate 4 years? Probably not having a huge event, as most military families and most families in this area make a mass exodus during a spring break, and others make a mass entrance into this area because of spring break. We said, probably not a huge event. But what is a great way for us to celebrate 4 years as a church? And we said, the best way to celebrate that is to begin that preparatory work within us as a culture to be on mission. And so I believe there was 26 people total that were on a missions trip yesterday up to Washington, D.C. If you were on that trip, would you stand up, please? They only left half of them in D.C. So we're going to shoot for better records next time. But that trip is, a preparatory work that we believe that God is doing within the life of Awaken, within our lives as people, to go from what I would say a consumer mentality to an actual following mentality. And see, we've been talking about that for the last few weeks. We're going through this series, Follow Me. And when we sat down as a church and we said, hey, leading up to Easter, what is the best thing for us to do? What do we want to point our people to? Where is God challenging us to move into as we move into the Easter season? And we said, let's simply just break down, what is it to follow Jesus? Just real simply, what is it to follow Jesus? The first week we talked about it's not a game of Jesus says. As many of us try to play that game, Simon Says. It's not an idea of following Jesus that we have to believe certain things and behave a certain way as we start following after Jesus. But we said within that context, as we identify with Jesus, He will identify with us. Within that context, we also explain, don't be surprised if you wake up one day and you look in the mirror and there is something different about you. Because God does not leave us the same. And so last week then we talked about, okay, what is another component of following Jesus? What is another component as Jesus commanded His disciples and then He commands us to follow me? What is another component within that? And we said, we dress differently. We dress like me. No, I'm kidding. We dress differently. Scripture tells us in Colossians 3 that we put on certain clothing when we follow Jesus. And we talked about chick flicks and how most of them are not rated PG, but we will say PG. And we talked about, that was a great acronym to talk to us about compassion and humility and kindness and forgiveness and love. And kindness again, because we said we as a church probably need a double layer of kindness, right? Yes, we do. And then we talked about patience and gentleness. And we said that is a great acronym for us to remember as we follow Jesus, we clothe ourselves to look differently than those around us. And it's the idea as we follow, we love the people that are in our midst. And through this process, again, we said, where do we want this series to point? And we said the best place for this series to point is towards Easter. It's towards challenging us as a congregation to be on mission locally and abroad. It's to challenge us to move from a place of consuming Christ to a place of actually following Christ. And so we asked the question, what does it look like to prepare for Easter? So we said, how did Jesus prepare for Easter? And as you look at how Jesus prepared for Easter, He prepared for Easter through the cross. And so we said, what does it look like for Awaken to prepare for Easter? And we challenged us to love the people that are around us. We challenged us to write 5 names down of people that we are praying for. people that we want to pray for and possibly invite to be with us next week on Easter. Not just to see the gospel, but to hear the gospel. And not just to hear the gospel through a talking head up front, but to see the gospel lived out through our daily lives, and to hear the gospel maybe over lunch or dinner or something that you are conversing with those people. You know, if you look into the stores, you see our culture preparing for Easter, right? And how do we prepare for Easter? What are some of those ways we prepare for Easter? Help me out. Easter baskets, absolutely. How many are you getting your kids Easter baskets? You bad parents. What are some other ways that we prepare for Easter? An egg hunt, okay. What else? Candy. How many of you guys love Peeps? Yeah, nobody loves those things. And you know what's funny is we used to give those things out every year to people. And then we figured out nobody likes these things. How many of you guys like Reese's peanut butter eggs? Oh yeah, everybody loves those things, right? Oh yeah. How many of you have run to the store already and got some of those things? Oh yeah, absolutely, right? Robin eggs. How many of you have gotten robin eggs? They're not as popular, are they? But we see our culture preparing for Easter around us. And so, again, we ask the question, what does it look like for Awaken to prepare for Easter? As we saw God do a preparatory work within the hearts of those people that were on that trip, as we saw them come back and change the culture of that ministry, as we saw God do a work in individual lives, as we saw God point people for the first time to who Jesus was, how are we preparing for Easter? And I wanted us today to look at a passage in Mark. Mark chapter 8. As you turn there to Mark chapter 8, you can find it Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 4 Gospels, kind of middle of the Bible. And we're going to plant ourselves in Mark 8. But as you go there, we wanted to make this point that without a cross, there is no resurrection. And so as we saw Jesus prepare for Easter, we saw him prepare through a cross. There is no life without death. And again, we saw Jesus prepare for Easter through the cross. We saw Jesus prepare for Easter through death, so that from death would come life. Through the cross would come a resurrection. Because we have to understand something. We have to understand that without God, we are far from him. We have to understand within our own lives there is a brokenness. There is something that we are missing. We as people tend to move about our own directions, right? I would say we wander. My wife would tell you I am a great example of wandering. I'm going to do this today. No, I changed my mind to do this. No, I think I'll do this. Last minute, I changed my mind and said, well, maybe I will play softball. My wife looked at me and she said, we just talked about this the last 3 days. And you said you probably weren't going to play. Well, I changed my mind. But it's through the gospel, it's through following after Jesus, we realize how far from Jesus we truly are. We realize that we are wanderers. We realize that God has created us and designed us in a certain image. And that the closer we understand that image, the more we realize how far from that we truly are. We realize that there is a sin, there is a dysfunction, there is a mess that separates us. And everything that we try cannot lead us to the place of walking in unison with God. It's only God himself who can lead us to a place of walking in unison with God. And so as we started Awaken, we said, what would it look like? Envision with me, what would it look like for a church to be started that would truly love and engage a city? What would it look like for a people to move from a place of consuming Christ to a place of following Christ? What would it look like for a people, for a group, for a church body to say, how can I love the people that are around me? How can I love my neighbors and my coworkers? How can I represent to them what the gospel spills out within my life? We said, what would it look like for a church to help people identify who God originally designed them to be? What would it look like for a church not to condemn people, but to help people expand into the future that God has for them? What would it look like for a church not to measure its success by how big of an event we can have, but by how many people we can send out into the world to love the city? And 4 years ago, we set out on that journey to say, what would it look like for a church to look like that? But for that to happen, we saw people go from a place of consuming Christ to a place of following Christ. Because you see, as we begin to follow after Christ, we begin to follow after Christ. Because doesn't God bless us in certain ways? If we follow after Christ, don't we see Him work in our marriages in a certain way? Don't we see the blessings of Him leading me and my spouse and my family closer together if we do that together? Don't you see those things? Don't we see, as we begin to follow after Christ, don't we see Him start to give us purpose? Maybe some of you, as little children, you were faced with the decision. And somebody sat with you and they said, hey, you can choose door A or door B. How many of you guys were those little children? Door A or door B? Door A is you follow and you accept Christ. Door B is, well, you're going to go to a place where God is not present. How many of you, that was your situation? And what door did you choose? You chose door A, right? I mean, who wouldn't choose door A? For others like myself, it was a place of saying, somebody said to me, God has purpose for your life. And I said, wow, I really need some purpose and direction in my life. As a young college student, it was like I had no direction, no purpose. And it was like, God can bring that to me. Wow, that is fantastic. For others of you, you may have walked into a church one day because somebody told you God can help with your dysfunction and your mess. And you said, man, that is great because I am one dysfunctional mess. Amen. And so we start to pursue after Christ, not because of what God wants to use our lives to do, not because we want to be devoted to God, but isn't it true that we start to follow Christ first because of what God can offer us? So we come in at a place of consuming. We come in at a place of what can God do for me? But there comes a point within that idea of following that we're going to look at in this passage. There comes a point within that idea of following. We come to a crossroads within our faith. And I believe that it's at that crossroads within our faith, God takes us from a place of consuming the gospel to a place of truly following. And in Mark, we see a guy named Peter. And I love Peter because Peter reminds me so much of me. Because Peter, Jesus said to him, hey, follow me. He used to be a fisherman. And Jesus said, hey, follow me. And so Peter's following Jesus for several years. And Jesus sees all these miracles, right? He sees Jesus heal this guy on the side of the road that was blind and now he can see. He sees Jesus as these friends lower this guy down through a roof that's paralyzed. And Jesus simply says, hey, get up and walk. And so Peter sees these miracles happen. Peter sees that he walked on water. How cool would that be if I just walked on water? Jesus even saw his mother-in-law healed. Now, there's mixed emotions on that one, I know. But Peter started following after Jesus. Not as a follower, but as a consumer. And that's what we see happen in this passage. Look here with me. Verse 27. Jesus and his disciples went to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, Jesus asked this question. He said, "Who do people say that I am?" All of us are going to have to answer that question at some point, right? All of us are going to have to answer the question, who do people say that Jesus is? Who do I say that Jesus is? You know, and there's many different things that people say, right? People say, well, he was a good teacher, or he was a religious figure, or he was a guy that led a group of people and taught them, or he was a rabbi, or he was this or that. One guy came out and he said, you know, Jesus is either a lunatic, a liar, or he is Lord. He is who he said that he is God. But all of us at some point will have to make a decision. Who do we say that God is? And Jesus asks his disciple this, who do people say that I am? And they replied, well, some say John the Baptist. Others say that, Jesus, you're Elijah. You're the prophet that walked in the Old Testament and has come back to life. Others say you're just one of the prophets. And Jesus says, no, who do you say that I am? And I love this. Peter is kind of that guy that blurts out an answer. You guys ever been in a situation, you just blurt out an answer? I found myself in multiple situations like that. I hope that I learn over the years to be quiet and be still. Otherwise, I make a fool of myself. And Peter kind of does this. Peter blurts out and he says, you are the Christ. Now Christ was not Jesus' last name. Okay? Christ means that Messiah, means that he was the one that God talked about in the old scriptures, in the Old Testament, that he was the one that was going to come to point people towards God. He was going to be God incarnate. He was going to be God who walked with us to show us who God was and to point us that, again, the idea that life cannot come unless a cross is entered first. Life cannot come unless death is entered first. Resurrection cannot come unless the cross comes first. And Jesus showed us all that, and he taught all that. And look at what he's trying to say here. Peter says, you are the Christ. And then it says, he then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this. And Peter took him aside, and what did he do? He rebuked him. Picture this. This is fantastic. Jesus is teaching. And he's trying to find out who is with me and who's not. He's trying to find out who is moved from a consumer of the miracles of God, which are incredible to be around and to see God work in our lives. Jesus is trying to figure out who has moved past being a consumer and who has moved to be a true follower. Well, Peter, I think in this instance, is still a consumer, if you will. Because Jesus starts talking about all this death and all this stuff that's going to happen. And what does Peter do? He says, hey, come over here, let's have a talk. Now, let me explain something to you, Jesus. This whole thing is going really well. I mean, think about this. We have crowds that follow us, man. You're like becoming famous, Jesus. And I'm kind of becoming famous. And John, well, at least you love John. But this whole thing is ready to explode. And if you keep talking about this death and denying yourself and all these things, man, you're just going to push people away, bro. You're not going to see this thing blow up like it could. It's got a lot of potential, Jesus. I picture Peter having that conversation. Can you see that? That conversation. And what does Jesus do? Oh, this is great. He looks at Peter and he says, "Get behind me, Satan." Has anybody ever said that to you before? Have you ever wanted to say that to somebody else? Oh, I'm sure you have, yes. Jesus looks and he says, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter, What you are talking about, you are not excited about this death and this cross that I've got to go to, not because of what it does to me, but it's going to affect your plan, Peter. It's going to affect your popularity, Peter. It's going to affect that you are also going to have to go the direction of denying yourself, Peter. Because to that point, Peter is following because he is consuming the blessings of God. But Jesus knows that there is going to come a crossroads within Peter's faith. As there is for many of us a crossroads within our faith. It goes on. It says, Jesus tells him, you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. You're only thinking about your own security and comfort, Peter. Verse 34, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples. And I picture Jesus kind of placing his disciples kind of front and center. And I picture Peter like being right there. I picture Jesus saying, hey, Pete, come here. I saved this seat for you. You really need to hear this, Pete. And Jesus continues and he teaches. He says, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. As soon as Jesus says cross, these people know what he's talking about. Because in that culture, track with me, in that culture, they would walk down these dirt roads. And the Roman government was really good at manipulation. They would have people line these streets with crosses. People that committed crimes and didn't follow the Roman government, they would hang them on crosses and line the street. I'll tell you, that would prohibit me from wanting to go against the Roman government. I would say, I don't want to be one of those guys. And so when Jesus says, pick up your crosses, they automatically think of that line of people they just walked by, hanging on the cross, dying from asphyxiation. And saying, wow, I don't know about this. And again, Peter, I think, is sitting there and he's saying, Jesus, you're blowing this whole thing, man. These people want the miracles. These people want the blessings of God. These people want their marriages to be fixed. These people want that dysfunction to go away. These people want you to pour down the blessings of heaven onto their lives. Jesus, you're blowing it, man. Jesus continues teaching. He says you must deny yourself. Now, this week, Awaken had an opportunity, and this is incredible. Awaken had an opportunity to train 7 other church planners. We had an opportunity to be a part of helping 7 other people plant churches. One of those couples, there was 12 people total, one of those couples is actually taking a training that they were involved with for 3 days this week. They're taking that training back to Africa. And their vision, their heart is to see 100 church planners trained in indigenous tribes in Africa, people who have never heard of the gospel. That is amazing that God would allow us as a church to be a part of that process of seeing other church planners trained up and sent out. Amazing. Now, through that process, they served us lunch. Lunch was really good. You know anything about me? I like food. Lunch was great. And at lunch every day, they offered us dessert. Well, the second day, dessert was spot on. They had cherry crumbled pie. Oh yeah, does that sound good to anybody? Yeah. So as you prepare for Easter this week, you can help me prepare for Easter through a cherry crumbled pie. A nervous laughter. I'm kidding. But the third day, I'm sitting there and I'm like, that dessert looks amazing. I had it yesterday. I should probably deny myself. And so the third day, I'm sitting there. Dessert came around. I said, no, thank you. I had vegetables and fruit, chicken salad sandwich. It was good, but not like cherry crumble pie. I mean, that just takes it to a whole new level, right? So I sat there, I denied myself, and I'm sitting there watching everybody else eat cherry crumble pie. My heart wept. And I, like Peter, said, Jesus, no, this isn't fair. I want to continue to consume, Jesus. Cherry crumble pie. So you see, God leads us all to a place where we have to deny ourselves. And we do that in different ways, right? I denied myself some pie. You may have denied yourself a Starbucks drink this morning. You may have denied yourself this or that this week. You may have denied yourself some sleep this week. Anybody deny yourself? Yeah, I figured. But Jesus is trying to take this to a different level. He's trying to help these disciples, and I think Peter especially, understand that we have to move from a place of not just consuming of the riches of God, but we have to become committed followers of God. And that happens at what I would call the crossroads of faith. That happens when God starts giving us a peek into our lives and saying, guess what, Mike? That can't come with you anymore. I think that begins to happen in our lives when an opportunity comes up for us at work, but we have to take a high road of integrity, knowing that we will lose that opportunity. That is part of that crossroads of faith, where we are denying ourselves, saying, God, I will take the high road because I need to move from just being a consumer of your blessings into a place where I am a true follower of you. We see that within relationships. Sometimes relationships don't follow us there. Sometimes that pay raise will not follow us there. Sometimes that job and promotion will not follow us there. Jesus continues on, and this is a phenomenal statement. This is a statement that you want to keep in your mind, you want to write down, you want to see every day. He says to them, he says, for whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. Jesus is telling them, Pete, man, you're going to be at a crossroads of faith. And if you look in Luke chapter 22, I encourage you to look later on, Luke chapter 22. Pete comes to a crossroads in his faith. Jesus is being taken to the cross. And we find Pete hiding out in a fire in the background. And one by one, three different people come up and say, hey, you were with that guy. And Pete says, oh, no, I wasn't. In fact, one of those people come up and it's a kid. And the kid says, hey, weren't you with him? And it says that Pete swears at the kid. And he tells the kid, no, I wasn't with the guy. And it says that Jesus and Pete, their eyes interlocked from a distance apart. Because Jesus told Pete that this would happen. But you see, at that moment, Pete is at this crossroads of faith where God is teaching him that following after Christ means moving from a consumer to an actual follower. It means that we will reach points in our life where Jesus says, that can't come with you. This week, as we were walking these other church planners through this training, I personally was reminded of what it means to walk through that crossroads of faith. And can we admit, when we walk through that crossroads of faith, it is not comfortable? It is probably one of the most uncomfortable places that we will be, because God is taking something off of us in order for us to move forward. But as we move forward, we see God do a work within our lives, and we taste a blessing of God that is more than we ever tasted of before. And as I sat in this training this week, I was reminded that many of us are going to have a hard time moving from being consumers of the gospel to actual true followers of Jesus Christ. And because of that, we will only taste a small piece of who God is. And it's because we will refuse at those crossroads to deny ourselves. I can't stand up here and tell you what those crossroads will be for you. But I know that God's Holy Spirit will speak to you through those crossroads, and He will share with you and show you, Mike, that can't come with you anymore. Just as He looked at Peter and said, Pete, this whole thing's going to change. Pete, you've been along for a 3-year ride. It's been a great ride. But Pete, this is where devotion comes in. Are you following me, or are you following after the blessings that I give? Because if you're only following after the blessings that I give, you're not truly following after me. Because again, before life has to come death. And before a resurrection that we will celebrate next week at Easter, there has to be the preparation of a cross. And Jesus, closing statement, what good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? Now I would bet, that if we had a choice, we're at the end of our life, we're staring death in the face, and I would ask the question, or God would ask us the question, what would you sacrifice at that point for your soul? I'm guessing all of us would say everything. I would give everything to save my soul. I would give everything to enter from this life into the next, to walk with God into glory, into an amazing future. And Jesus says, what can a man give in exchange for his soul? I love this. If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, and we know how whacked up our society is. If anyone is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his Father's glory and with the holy angels. So as the band comes up and continues to lead us in worship, I want to challenge us. At what point is God calling us to deny ourselves, to move from a place of consuming the blessings of God? And those blessings can look like community, it can look like relationships, those blessings can look like God working in our marriages, those blessings can look like God providing incredible things for me. But at some point, there will come a crossroads of faith where Jesus is asking the question, who do you say that I am? Are we going to follow after Christ in devotion? Are we going to follow after Christ, not because of the blessings that I see in the future, but because of my devotion to know more of who God is? That is my challenge here this morning. Awaken was started 4 years ago so that we could see people move to a place of saying, God, I want to be about your mission. God, I want to be about loving this city and showing you through my life to the people around me. God, I want to be about letting people know the life change that comes from following you. And that's why this work was started. And many of you have seen your lives changed as a result. Many of you are tasting the blessings in your life of the sacrifice that came before. But there will come a point, that crossroads of faith, where Jesus will call us to sacrifice, to deny ourselves in some way, to continue to move forward. And today we are going to have, one of us is going to be baptized today. Others of you may be challenged to be baptized. I would encourage you to take that step and say, I am being baptized to show people my devotion to follow after Jesus. Not just to consume of his blessings, but to follow, be a true follower of God. And know that I will reap the blessings of eternity for that. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, I thank you for the opportunity today. As we look into Easter next week, Lord, I thank you. It's amazing that you have allowed a church like this now today to celebrate 4 years. And Lord, I pray that you would be preparing us to make those sacrifices, to deny ourselves, so that others may be impacted with the gospel, so that we could truly taste of the riches and the depth of who you are. Not just be a part of the peripheral of your blessings, but be in the center of your blessings as a true follower and not a consumer. So Lord, I pray that you would be preparing us this week for Easter next week, and I pray, Lord, that you would be preparing us for a lifetime of following after you and letting others see your grace in our lives and be pointed to you as well. It's in your precious name, Lord. Amen.